Biden's government claimed that they were bombing ISIS terrorists when in fact they were killing an innocent family, including 7 children. What was the point in the war in Afghanistan when half of the 14 trillion spent went to private defence companies? And as Julian Assange said, the goal in Afghanistan is to have an endless war, not a successful war, in order to wash money out of tax bases of the United States and into the hands of the transnational security elite. Children's lives are being lost so that a transnational elite can make money. That's the truth of Afghanistan. This is the story that Biden's administration, as a sort of one last Afghan hurrah, bombed an innocent family, killing 7 children. A US drone strike in Afghanistan last month killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, and not an Islamic State extremist, as first claimed, the Pentagon has admitted. Good news! We've killed an Islamic State extremist. Sorry, children. We've killed children. I know there's a difference. For days after the 29th of August strike by a single Hellfire missile, even as evidence mounted to the contrary, Pentagon officials asserted that the strike had been conducted correctly. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, had hailed it as a righteous strike. Now look at that language, righteous strike. That's religious language. Look at what's being evoked, the idea of a force from above smiting the heathen Muslims. I would say that's what's being indicated by that use of language. When you have that kind of vocabulary available to you to underwrite military action overseas, particularly drones now when it's all sort of remote control and hands clean, white glove killing, you know, the sort of step between terrorists and children is not a significant one. Think about it, like how outraged you should be if you were the difference between killing someone who's a threat to everybody's security, who's dangerous, malicious, malfeasant, miscontent, going around the world killing people, blowing stuff up, and just innocent children. The kind of language that's being used, whether it's the description of drones as sort of safe and hands clean, or the kind of religious language that presents these murders, because that's what they are to you. If you meet a person in the real world in your life that's lost a child, God forbid that you are a person that's lost a child, you sort of, the haunting religious feeling of that, you know, the haunting grief-like feeling of that you feel like, oh God, I'm so sorry, and you have to sort of drop into a new register, don't you, when you meet someone that's been through that. That's happening essentially in order for finance and wealth to be filtered, washed, rinsed, sucked away from you if you're an American taxpayer into the hands of transnational elites. I wonder why Julian Assange is still in jail. News organisations later raised doubts about the Pentagon's version of events, reporting that the driver of the targeted vehicle was a long-time employee at an American humanitarian organisation, citing an absence of evidence to support the Pentagon's assertion that the vehicle contained explosives. Lloyd Austin, the Defence Secretary, said in a statement, "I offer my deepest condolences to surviving family members of those who were killed. We apologise and we will endeavour to learn from this horrible mistake." I mean, look, I don't even like, in a conversational manner, to conjure what kind of condolences would need to be offered if I went through that. It's hard, isn't it, for us to translate it into like, oh, that's the same as if that happened to me. That's the same as if it happened to you. What do you think? Like, because people wearing slightly different clothes and talking in a different voice. No, you know, none of us think that deep down. We know that they're all like everybody's the same. We're all the same. We have the same feelings of affection and emotion for people that we love, however we express ourselves religiously or culturally. And the idea that that can be overlooked, and indeed that those tensions can be heightened, and that prejudice can be heightened, and that bigotry can be utilised, enforced, cultivated, not by individuals, not like, oh, racist individuals, no, by racist messaging of informed, intelligent media organisations, not the racism of like tiki-torch nitwits, more subtle, more insidious, that leads to the actual death of children precisely because it's deemed permissible, specifically if there's a profit to be had. Brian Kastner, Senior Crisis Advisor with Amnesty International's Crisis Response Programme, said it should be noted that the US military was only forced to admit its failure in this strike because of the current global scrutiny on Afghanistan. Many similar strikes in Syria, Iraq and Somalia have happened out of the spotlight, and the US continues to deny responsibility while devastated families suffer in silence. So even though you would think the death of 7 children, 10 human beings, unnecessarily in order for transnational elites to make money would be a rare thing, It's a common thing. This sort of thing is happening all the time. We're being prevented from realising it because obviously, if you're a sane human being, you go, I don't want a war in Afghanistan at that cost. I don't want people losing their children and their families just so a transnational elite can make half of $14 trillion over a 20-year period. Oh no, maybe it was a coincidence. It was a coincidence that they made that $7 trillion. See who would be advocating for a war that didn't make any money. As your man said, war is a racket. Just to reiterate some of the numbers, up to half of the $14 trillion spent by the Pentagon since 9/11 went to for-profit defence contractors, a study found, while much of this money went to weapons suppliers. The research is the latest to point to the dependence on contractors for war zone duties as contributing to mission failures in Afghanistan in particular. Again, Julian Assange. The goal in Afghanistan is to have an endless war, not a successful war, in order to wash money out of tax bases in the United States into the hands of transnational security elites. So sometimes when you think, oh no, Afghanistan was a disaster, from what perspective? From what perspective is it a disaster? Not if you're trying to make $7 trillion. If that's your goal. But William Hartung, the author of Monday's study by Brown University's Costs of War project, said it's essential that the Americans examine what role the reliance on private contractors played in the post-9/11 wars. In Afghanistan, that included contractors allegedly paying protection money to warlords and the Taliban themselves, and the Defense Department insisting on equipping the Afghan Air Force with complex Black Hawk helicopters and other aircraft that few US contractors knew how to maintain. If it were only the money, that would be outrageous enough, Hartung said, of instances where the Pentagon's reliance on contractors backfired. But the fact that it undermined the mission and put troops at risk is even more outrageous, not to mention the death of these children. US officials, after September 11, 2001 attacks, embraced private contractors as an essential part of the US military response. It started with then Vice President Dick Cheney, the former CEO of Halliburton. Halliburton received more than $30 billion to help set up and run bases, feed troops and carry out other work in Iraq and Afghanistan by 2008, the study says. Cheney and the defence contractors argued that relying on private contractors for work that service members did in previous wars would allow for a trimmer US military and be more efficient and cost effective. Well, I hope that's part of the condolences offered to the surviving members of that family who lost 10 people that they loved, including 7 children.
The strike was one of the US military's final acts in Afghanistan before ending its 20-year military operation there.
Right, we've had our $7 trillion. Just one final murder of some children before we pop off.
We should be clear here, though. This isn't some new phenomenon because the US no longer has eyes on the ground. This is a feature of the war on terror that we've been covering since 2008. It's particularly a feature of signature strikes in the drone wars that were introduced by George W. Bush, but then really embraced and pioneered by Barack Obama.
When you watch something like that, does it help you to understand that the distinction between these administrations is pretty minor when it comes to the crunch? That they promote small differences in order to prevent you from understanding and realising that an entirely different world is possible.
This would have gone down in the annals of history as, in the words of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a righteous strike against ISIS. This is what the Pentagon's been relying on all these years. Who knows how many times this has happened in the past.
It's important to understand that the entire point of that project was, as Julian Assange, to take money from taxpayers and give that money to defence contract firms. You can't just do that directly, so you have to triangulate into an unnecessary war in Afghanistan. That's what has to happen in order for that transfer of wealth to be facilitated. Consider other ways that situations and issues might be mobilised in order to transfer wealth from one group to another group, usually a poorer group to an elite group. It seems to be a relatively common practice to me.
The discussion in the media here in the US is, oh, well, doesn't that mean that the US shouldn't have left Afghanistan? We no longer have eyes on the ground. This is what over-the-horizon war looks like. It's kind of missing the point. That's a red herring. Civilians were being killed even when the US had eyes on the ground, wherever they are, through drone wars and through the rules of engagement that the US already has.
It's not an accident. It's not an unfortunate event. It's a necessary byproduct. It's an inevitable byproduct. In order for that wealth transfer to take place, you have to have dead children. That's calculated as it's called like collateral damage. It's a necessary loss. It's basically nothing.
So this is just another example, it's not so much relevant to the pullout from Afghanistan, but once again relevant to the rules of engagement in the US's drone wars, which of course Joe Biden and certainly President Obama and President Trump, actually, he escalated them enormously too, are relying on increasingly instead of having a large footprint on the ground.
There you are then. If you want to understand wealth transfer, if you want to understand war, if you want to understand why children die and why there's animosity towards Western nations in the Middle East, look at this story. And note that it is not inadvertent or accidental, but a necessary economic cycle in order to transfer wealth from ordinary people to elites. That's what's taken place. That's why Julian Assange is in prison. That's why those children are dead. That's why it's impossible to alter these systems through the ordinary means of democracy. That's why there was a long war in Afghanistan. That's why children died. If you enjoyed that reporting on that terrible, sad, awful story, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think I've missed, what I could have explored differently. Let me know what insights, what nuances you have. Tell me what you've understood that maybe I haven't understood as well. If you liked this video, it seems like the wrong word, but if it was informative, have a look at this one. It's along similar lines and you'll probably enjoy that too. And if you need to chill out now and learn something positive, have a look at this video. Most importantly of all, sign up to russellbrand.com. You'll be on my mailing list and I can reach out to you directly. Thank you.